Welcome to Volendam, a village in the Netherlands about 20 kilometers away from Amsterdam, world famous for its traditional dress, its fishing history and its music. But it's also a village which has a very long and interesting history of Catholic tradition. The footage that you're watching now was shot in front of St. Vincent's Church in Volendam around the year 1930. Volendam has always been a Catholic village and remarkably is the only village around the former Southern Sea that remained Catholic even after the Reformation in the 1570s. Considering the offers they had to make to go to church in Edam and being ridiculed by the other fishermen for still flying the king's flag, for instance, we must conclude that Catholicism is extremely deep-rooted in the culture of Volendam. But the church, as you can see behind me, and as you just saw in the archive footage, hasn't always looked like this. Finally being granted permission to build their own church in 1860, the poor fishermen's village of Volendam tried to resurrect its own church as quickly and as cheaply as possible. They asked architect Molkenboer to design the church, and a firm from Zwolle, in the east of the country, to do the construction work. Now you will understand that there are no actual photos from this church from this time period. But this artist's impression will give you a good idea of what the church must have looked like in 1860. A small and low, single-nave church built in a sober style. Since the work had to be carried out as cheaply as possible, problems soon occurred. Inspection in 1866 proved that the church was constructed very badly. Bad cement had been used, and apparently there was not one good brick in the outer walls. When in 1877 a piece of the roof came down, the whole roof had to be renewed. Between 1860 and 1882, the Catholic population had grown from 1,200 to about 1,350 people. To fit all those people comfortably, the church was enlarged in 1882 after the design of architect A.C. Blaise, who added a tall transept and a choir. By 1904, the church once again had become too small. It took until 1908 before plans to expand the church for the third and final time were carried out, and that is when the church took its current form. The oldest part of the church that had remained from the small church built in 1860 was taken down in its entirety to make way for a large and higher central nave, getting rid of the discrepancy in height between the old nave and the transept and the choir. Having become proportionally too small for the new church, the tower was enlarged as well. The church became much wider because of the addition of two aisles on either side of the nave, spanning the full width of the existing transept. The new, current church can house 1,500 parishioners. Knowing all this, you will realize that this is a regular village church, and it has never been the object to make this a monumental building. There are some interesting points worth noting, however. The church is oriented to the east. Now in medieval times, the east used to symbolize light and life, because the east is where the sun comes up. Of course, this is not a medieval building, but there are some references to medieval architecture. Consider the buttresses and the Gothic windows containing biblical stories depicted in stained glass. Different pastors have added to or changed the interior of the church to their own ideas, not always conforming to one specific style. Erroneous, one could say, but that doesn't make it wrong.
This stone commemorates the sanctification of this church in 1908. It had been sanctified in 1860 because the bishop had lost its temper with the Volendams. Here on my right is the high altar, in neo-Gothic style. It was placed here in 1997, after first having been used in two churches in Haarlem. Above it, in the stained glass, we see depictions of the miraculous catch of fish and Jesus calms the storm. Obvious choices, considering the history of Volendam as a true fisherman's village. These also consider the Ionic columns and pilasters, references to classical architecture. As I briefly mentioned before, the church has a really eclectic style, both from the outside and the inside. This is an interior photo of this church from the 19th century.
You will see that Ionic columns are much more prominent here, a sign of classical architecture. Yet you can also clearly recognize pointed arches, which are a true influence from Gothic architecture. You will also see that the church is generally much smaller.
The aisles weren't there yet. The roof was much lower, and here appear to be pilasters are now replaced by columns.
Around the time of the interior photo I just showed you, 3 men from Volendam fought in the Pope's army to prevent the Papal States in Italy from falling. We are now in the Volendams Museum, and behind me you will see a painting of one of these 3 men at older age. His name is Jan Kwakman, and he was painted by the Dutch painter Willem Bouters around 1920. Each of these 3 men was decorated individually for their service, and together they also received a large silver medal. The 3 men agreed to donate this medal to the church, and in the church it was melted and fused into the Luna of the Monstrance, a vessel used to exhibit the consecrated host during special religious occasions.
Before I'm leaving the church to the side entrance over here, I'd like to draw your attention to this commemoration stone, commemorating the restoration of this church in 1997, which the Volendam population raised 2.3 million guilders. If anything, this will show you how important the church was to the people of Volendam, and remains to this day.